In this week's episode, I'm joined by Veronica Smith, they, Equitable research and data scientist who loves to dance for fun, making her a dancing data scientist. This week, our conversation is about Barbie rocking a CGM, Brits clocking out and leveling up, and why the UK's done being gagged by NDAs, and more. Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I have found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with some of these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. Welcome to the show, Veronica. Welcome back to the show, I should say.
Thank you, Bernadette. It's great to be here with you again. As you mentioned, I'm a data justice consultant and I'm founder of Data to Insight, and I'm all about partnering with people to collect, make sense of, and use data to benefit marginalized communities.
I love that. And that's really why you're here today to talk about about your most recent project and what that's like. So please tell us all about the Washington LGBTQ plus survey that you've been involved in.
Yes, and that is one of the things that's giving me a lot of hope right now. Last year, the Washington LGBTQ Commission, which is a state agency in Washington to benefit our community, sponsored a statewide survey to capture as many voices from the LGBTQ community. And we got almost 7,000 responses from people in every county of the state and ages 11 to 98. So we really feel that was a phenomenal success. It's by far the largest data set we've had in the state. And this bridges the data gap that we have because we lack national data, and we're going to lack national data for the foreseeable future. So it's really a landmark study, and the findings were released in June, shared with our legislators. And now I've been going around to Pride events again after being out as many as I could in Western Washington and Washington State University, which led the survey. They were really focused on Eastern Washington. And now I get a chance to thank people for taking the survey and share the findings. And then in the fall, I'm planning to do data parties with community organizations so they can really use that data to better serve their communities and get more resources to serve their communities.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So you were involved in everything from the dissemination to sort of the follow-up. Like what has your role been? And let's talk a little bit about those data parties, because who doesn't love a good data party?
Yes. I started, so my firm Data to Insight partnered with Washington State University, which led the study. And we started back in November of 2024, working with the commission, designing the survey, testing it, getting institutional review board approval. And then we released the survey on May 31st before the June 1st Pride event. And then we collected data until January. And then WSU did the analysis and then shared the findings. And like you said, now I'm out in Western Washington, letting people know about it and offering to do data parties and community conversations. And data parties are really I think about it like as a sandbox where people can kind of get into the data, and it's a large survey, 130 plus page report, and we ask questions about a broad set of information. And so what I'm going to be working to do is like kind of work in getting that into digestible chunks for like health organizations that are really interested in the health, part. I just talked to an organization that's more interested in the hate crime part. And so we're going to dive into data parties, and they're in person. Usually you can do them remote, but I love doing them in person where we can have posters of the data. People can use sticky notes to like ask their questions or make comments. It really is about people owning the data because it is the community's data.
And so they can then use that data to apply for funding and to reduce some of the disparities that were identified in the report.
Absolutely. There weren't really a lot of surprises in the report, or really any that I can think of. But what it does now is we have hard data now, and they can talk about that with their communities. They can put that into proposals for funders. It just really gives them much more power to demonstrate that what is going on with our community.
And you mentioned earlier something about how we're not going to have federal data for a while. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
Yes. So with the previous administration, and we felt like we were getting close to being able to include sexual orientation and gender identity data in the national census. But now with the new administration, we know that that's not going to be the case. And so since census data is collected, every 10 years, we know that it's going to be, at least 15 years before we have a chance to get that into the census data. And then this administration has even gone farther for some of the data, all of the data that's been collected on our community, and taken it down and stopped any research, from happening. And so it's really up to other organizations and in many cases states to collect this data, steward this data, and really help it benefit our communities.
Washington has achieved a really big milestone here, but there are a few other states which are now starting to do their own survey. So Washington sort of broke ground, and congrats on being on the leading edge there. So what other states have similar surveys in progress?
Well, Mississippi actually did one back in 2019. And then Oregon has one underway. And so they're going to be able to do more than a survey. They're actually doing community circles to get more qualitative data as well as the survey data. So that's really exciting. And then there's other states around the country. So California, actually South Dakota, and others have collected some type of data, and there's actually some national standards for collecting data. So there's data being collected, and I think with these state surveys and also with what's going on at the federal government, there's going to be more coordination across states to partner to collect more of this data, because one of the things that folks may not know is with the younger generations, we're having more people identify as a member of the LGBTQIA2S community. So we're seeing it in some cases as high as 20%. Whereas, with my generation, I'm X generation, it was like between 5 and 10%.
Can you share a few other data points as well from your findings?
Yes. So one of the findings was that in our community, about 40% of folks reported owning their own home, which is about 20% less than the overall population in the state. And so that wasn't particularly surprising. But again, having that housing information is so important because we've been trying to advocate to legislators about the housing needs of our community. So now we have that data. The other thing that WSU did is they looked at responses before the election and after the election, since the survey, spanned that. And as you won't be surprised to hear that anxiety and depression were reported at higher rates after the election. But one of the things that was a little bit of a surprise was that folks felt safer in Washington as a member of our community after the election. And our hunch is that given what's happening, or they anticipated happening in the national landscape, they felt even better about being in Washington, where we have so many policies and legal protections.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks for giving us some insight, Veronica. That's awesome. Well, let's move into this week's good vibe. All right, the first story this week comes from the United Kingdom, where which is now banning non-disclosure agreements that silence victims of workplace harassment and discrimination cases. So the plan will void existing NDAs and free both victims and witnesses to speak without fear of lawsuits. So NDAs have long perpetuated abuse by shielding repeat offenders and muting marginalized voices, especially those who already face higher rates of workplace misconduct charges. So, big deal here. This is a really big deal.
Yes. Yeah, this is definitely a positive change. One part of healing from any kind of abuse is to speak your truth. So when you're ready, and keeping secrets about abuse perpetrates harm for survivors. And so you mentioned reviewing companies' confidentiality practices and updating those out of date practices is an important part of retention and risk mitigation. And one company I know of who's providing an equitable resolution system is the Equity Consortium, led by Julia Ishmael. And this system can make conflict transformative, promoting repair and healing within the workplace.
Awesome. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. All right, the second story this week comes from the British Grand Prix. So while engines roared, Sir Lewis Hamilton's Mission 44 Foundation quietly stole the show, transforming Silverstone into a launch pad for systemic change. So Hamilton gave £20 million and created Mission 44 Foundation to tackle education, employment, and mobility gaps for underrepresented youth, reaching over $350,000. So this is all related to the Grand Prix, which is very, very cool. Lots of structural solutions in this foundation's work.
Yes, I love this story. I'm not a car racing fan. And this has now made me a fan of Sir Lewis Hamilton for sure. He's modeling the way of what leveraging privilege can look like to achieve social justice. And I personally love mentoring and sponsoring marginalized students and professionals to help them realize the futures they want. And the fact that the foundation is supporting and championing young people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds and providing those tools and resources to succeed. This is literally putting his money where his mouth is, and we definitely need more of this.
And we sure do. We sure do. All right. The next story comes from Germany, where several German cities, including Mannheim, are subsidizing €10 night taxi vouchers for women amid rising gender-based violence. So let's be clear, these taxi vouchers are a Band-Aid solution. They're not addressing the root cause of sexual offenses, which are increasing. 68% of women have avoided walking alone at night. But this program, which is fully digital and inclusive of trans women, is popular. So it's a voucher solution treating some symptoms of patriarchy, but it's a good start.
Absolutely. I think this is somewhat of a bittersweet story. It's certainly alarming that sexual offenses in Germany have surged.
Yeah.
And the tax vouchers appear to be helping reduce opportunities for sexual assaults that occur. And I agree with your assessment that this is addressing a symptom and not the disease. And as a former architect, I have seen how using universal design can change behavior and remove barriers for people in the built environment. And I wonder what the psychological and social causes behind this surge are. And so this is a lever of change that's important to address as well.
It is. And, speaking of inclusive design, Vienna is offering a more promising blueprint that's addressing systemic change. They're redesigning parks, widening paths, and building for inclusion from the ground up. So that's really a more effective approach in the long term, but, it's still not addressing the actual issue of violence in the first place.
Yeah.
All right. The fourth story comes from Mattel, which just introduced its first ever Barbie doll with type 1 diabetes, complete with a continuous glucose monitor, insulin pump, and blue accessories symbolizing global diabetes awareness. This was developed in partnership with Breakthrough T1D, and it reflects the reality of 9 million people worldwide living with this condition.
Yeah, I love that Mattel partnered with both diabetes researchers and advocates, including people from the group that a company wants to sell to is about social justice. And I also love that they honored global role models like Lila Moss, and that I loved her message that being different is cool. I think that's affirming to all of us to be true to ourselves. And I also really appreciated the research that they're supporting on the value of doll play and helping parents and caregivers understand that dolls can be more than toys and that they can help with positive social development. And this helps me feel better about playing with all my Barbies when I was younger, and that it helped me develop empathy because again, coming from the X generation, there weren't as much representation in Barbie. They were all the blonde, long haired, not proportional dolls. So I think this is a real improvement, and I love seeing it.
Yeah, me too. I also played with Barbies, and also yes, lack of diversity for this Gen Xer as well. All right. The last story this week also comes from the UK, where all 17 companies in the latest UK trial of a shorter work week, which is either a 4-day work week or a 9-day fortnight, all 17 companies are making it permanent. So this is impacting about 1,000 workers, keeping their full pay. So the results of this latest trial, so they've done multiple here in the UK that have worked well. The result is less burnout, 62% less burnout, 45% more life satisfaction, and in some cases, doubled business performance. This is especially important access point for caregivers and workers with disabilities.
Absolutely. I've had an eclectic career. I also was an HR professional. And so I'm really pleased to see that there are social experiments going on in businesses of all sizes to answer questions about the viability and value of 4-day work weeks. Because I know I have observed that business leaders want to answer two questions. What is the impact of this schedule on productivity and financial performance? And what is the justification for paying employees the same salary for working less hours? And it does appear that the experiment is increasing both productivity and financial performance for some businesses. So I think that will increases the likelihood of leaders seeing that there's a positive ROI without reducing pay, and that it is more likely then that these practices will be adopted by more businesses. The other question that HR and operations folks are focused on is how do you successfully make the transition from a 5-day to a 4-day work week? And I love that the 4-day week foundation is offering guidance on how to do that.
Yeah, they are. And I think every pilot that I have read about seems to have done quite well. One thing, though, I believe is that the idea is that the hours aren't going down, they're just condensed in a shorter time frame. So I think in many cases,
Oh,
employees are
okay.
still working like 4 10-hour days and still getting
Oh,
40
okay.
hours, just in a more condensed, yeah, just in 4 days.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, at least in most of the all of the stories that I have read about. All right, so let's move into this week's good vibes to go. I'll share my good vibe to go and invite you to share your good vibe to go. So my good vibe to go is a TED Talk, the case for a 4-day work week. So watch that; you will be convinced, and check that out. It'll also be in the show notes. Veronica, what is your good vibe to go?
Well, Dr. Leticia Nieto is a leadership coach, psychotherapist, and educator specializing in liberation and equity and cultural responsiveness. And I was at a workshop led by her last year, and she said, fascism is not fun, and fighting fascism can be fun. And so one of the things I've done to make fighting fascism fun is to create an anti-fascist book club. And the book that we're reading right now is calling in how to start making change with people that you want to cancel. And it's by Dr. Loretta J. Ross. And it's been fantastic. We're doing it in two parts. So we finished the half of the book, and now we'll meet for the other half of the book. And one of the members said that this is like the best book they've read in a long time. And it's really helping us all think about how can we connect with people that we may not 100% agree with and come together to build community and fight fascism.
Love it. We'll make sure that book gets in the show notes. Thanks, Veronica. You have been a delightful guest. How can folks get in touch with you?
Oh, I love being on your podcast, Bernadette. Thanks so much for inviting me again. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm at Veronica Smith at data2insight. That's DATA, the number 2, insight.com.
Awesome. That will go in the show notes. Thanks, Veronica. And folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes, bringing good vibes to DEI.